At the dawn of the dinosaurs was Coelophysis. Lively and intelligent, it was well on the way to establishing the reign of the dinosaurs. Ironically, no sooner had Coelophysis got a foothold than the species was wiped out by a catastrophe.
These bone beds are telling us that a number of animals are dying together and that these killing events are wiping out large numbers of animals across that coastal plain. These animals must have been struggling in the mud. There had to be some kind of movement that churned the mud up.
The animal died in a stream bed, and the lower jaw had separated from the skull up there.
And it's clear that they were probably crossing a swollen river and got drowned trying to cross.
Well, the explanation we had for this bone bed is that a herd of centrosaurs tried to cross a river in flood, and that a lot of these animals drowned.
It's most likely that these animals died trying to cross the river in flood.
We looked for fossils in sedimentary rocks, rocks that were laid down by rivers and streams when these animals actually lived.
Or perhaps it was just something as simple as a flood.
First of all, it was buried in a flooding event, but it was almost certainly ripped up by those flood waters as well.
Sometimes bone beds accumulate from large areas of the land where floods have brought all kinds of animal remains together and mixed them up.
Floodwaters spreading across the plains could have washed together the remains of several unrelated tyrannosaurs.
It appears that the animals were the victims of a huge flood. Extremely powerful currents piled their multi-ton bodies in a stack, and the river sediment buried their bones.
The dinosaur had to be buried, very, very rapidly. But how? It was buried very rapidly in a flash flood.
The entire floodplain was probably scattered with these rivers, with ponds and lakes and large meadows.
In the sea.
Fossilized dinosaur bones are often found in sediment created by rain or flood. And there was water everywhere.
The great creature had died in the water.
Minerals which are dissolved in solution, they move around in groundwaters which surrounded our body originally.
Leo's body had been submerged underwater, then covered by silt.
So what we think was going on here is that this entire area was flooded out 75 million years ago during a hurricane or an intense tropical storm.
And with the floodwaters rising, Leo was doomed.
Regardless of how Leonardo died, or how he ended up in the water, the fact remains that that carcass had to have been buried very, very rapidly.
As the storm abated, the floodwaters receded, leaving behind widespread carnage.
During a violent storm that carried the bone in a flash flood down the river and washed me up on the beach. Now with time, as the water receded and waned, the sand would just deposit right on top of me and bury me.
This entire area was covered by a tropical sea. You can find the remains of some of the mammals who came after the seas receded.
Leonardo's life was lived along the shores of the Western Interior Seaway. As the climate warmed, the inland sea receded. Could a single catastrophic event have been responsible for their deaths?
Flood.
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 Flooding event.
Floods.
Floodwaters.
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 Flooded
in a flash flood.
Floodplain.
In a flash flood.
It appears that the animals were the victims of a huge flood.
But it was almost certainly ripped up by those flood waters as well.
Floodwaters spreading across the plain